Hello everyone, my name is Tina Ruggieri. I am the Assistant Curator at the Abrams Engel Institute for the Visual Arts, located on the campus of the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I'm excited to be here today with artist Jennifer Coates. Jennifer is one of the 37 artists in AEIVA's current exhibition, A la Carte, a visual exploration of our relationship with food. Jennifer is a painter living and working in New York City and Pointel, Pennsylvania. She received her BFA from the University of Pennsylvania and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and her MFA from Hunter College. She has had exhibitions at Freight and Volume Gallery in New York, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia, High Noon Gallery in New York, Front Gallery in Houston, and that is to only name a few. Her work has been written about in the Brooklyn Rail, Art Critical, Hyperallergic, the Huffington Post, Smithsonian Journals, and Art News, among many other publications. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
So not only are you a visual artist, but you're also a musician and a writer. Can you give us a little background on how you became interested in art and becoming an artist?
Oh, yeah. I'll just background it a little bit by saying, like, I was sort of raised playing music. I started playing music when I was 5, and it was sort of weirdly expected of me that I would go into music, but I really didn't have a performing personality, and my sort of secret love was drawing and painting, and drawing and painting all throughout high school and elementary school. That was my way to sort of slow down everything. Like, I didn't understand people, I didn't understand the world around me, but I felt that I could understand or slightly control what was happening on the two-dimensional page.
Yeah.
So I always loved making art, and then finally I got accepted for art and music at Carnegie Mellon, where I only went for a year, and I just realized, you know what, I'm not going to fake being a performer. I want to be alone in my studio all day. That's who I am. And as later on in my 30s, I started realizing there was, in fact, a performer in me, and I did enjoy playing music. And that actually helped me with my interest in teaching, sort of getting more comfortable in front of groups of people through music, helped me be able to talk in front of groups of people about art in general. But yeah, that's sort of how it went. I'm a studio rat who likes to be in their own weird mental world all day, every day.
I understand. I'm a pretty shy person, and I have found that art, and obviously going to school for art history, you have to give very long presentations about and read your papers. And I have somehow come out of my shell in the last few years. I'm not quite as shy. I'm more comfortable talking in front of people, and you find these ways to do that.
So great to be able to burst through the shyness and be like, oh my gosh, I can do this.
But you've created several different bodies of work throughout your career. Can you talk about this specific work for A la Carte, which is depicting food?
Yeah, that was a really exciting period for me, because I was coming out of a way of working that was very much like I was exploring trying to optimize acrylic paint. So from everything from like very kind of finely wrought patterns to like big spills, but I was working in a kind of more abstract way. And when I finally, at my breakthrough moment, I was kind of like, oh, I'm getting tired of just using paint to paint, abstracted landscapes. I want to paint something that has meaning and that anchors us to the everyday. And, when you're kind of in that mode of like, I want my work to change, I'm looking for something, I'm not sure what it is, you find things that resonate with you. So one of the things that I saw during this period of kind of like right as my work was about to move into the food, I was looking at an old art forum, and I saw a Klaus Oldenburg sculpture, and it wasn't one of his food pieces, but it was not a typewriter, but a cash register, an old-fashioned cash register. Yeah. And it looked like it was very kind of primitive and painterly, and it looked like it had just been dug out of the earth from like thousands of years ago. But we know what it is. The shape is totally recognizable. And then I had another experience when I was painting a pattern that was sort of like this slightly warping grid with lots of little squares. It came into my head like, what if you painted it gingham? you know, like the gingham pattern, that is so recognizable. That anchors you to the everyday, but it wouldn't interfere with the way that I was painting.
Mhm.
However, it just changed the meaning of everything I was doing. So I started looking for situations in our everyday experience that would allow me to sort of frame painting moves.
Yeah.
And we're looking at this bread piece right now, bread with jam. And I got so excited when I thought like a piece of bread is like it's like an opportunity to paint in your everyday life, right? Like if you're spreading the peanut butter and the jelly on, you're kind of, maybe without realizing it, you're like, there's aesthetic decisions that are happening. You know, how close to the edge of the bread are you going to take the peanut butter? Like, what's the peanut butter to jam ratio going to be? It's like sort of different for every person, different every time you do it. And I had this weird theory, like a lot of the food paintings, I would allow myself to sort of do image research, going deep into the past and trying to find precedents for the behavior or the way of thinking. And I had this whole theory about peanut butter and jelly having its origins in like human sacrifice. On the stone slab, there'd be like a human or an animal, and they'd be, you know, cut apart with a knife or whatever, and their innards would splatter everywhere. And the stone was like this bounded area, like a painting or like a piece of bread. So, I mean, I had all kinds of things. So I thought like, you know, bread with the knife, that's actually a really violent thing. And the jelly is sort of bloody. And so I allowed myself to really play with the materials within the bounds of the bread. And I'm thinking about like abstract expressionism and color field painting and ways to kind of quote from art history, but within the sort of, you know, slightly comic bounds of the piece of bread. That was a lot of information I just spewed at you.
No, it's okay. You actually, you covered a lot right there. But what's interesting is that you mentioned the comic. And so I kind of look at some of these as humorous. And so I wanted you to maybe touch on the idea of humor within these works, because I'm going to go real quick to the ground beef. To me, this one is full of humor. Not only is it based in abstraction, but I kind of also relate it to like this idea of a brain. Like, is it a brain? Is it squigglies from the brain, or is it ground beef, or what is it? And so there's this like humor within that I feel that you're touching on. And so I would love to hear a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was cracking myself up a lot of the time when I was making these food works, where I would just think, oh my God, like things that I never would have thought would be a painting subject for me, like ground beef. I also did like noodle paintings, like shrimp lo mein and meatballs and spaghetti. And I just, you know, every visual food event, like I thought, you know, there's just weird technology that goes into it. Like, who even thought of like squeezing mashed up beef out of a tube so it would come in these little wavy shapes? Like, there had to have been some kind of weird aesthetic decision that underwrites that, even if everyone forgot what that is.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of trying to like tease that out again. And for me, with this particular painting, I was definitely thinking about like Philip Guston's small paintings.
Yes. Yeah.
His paintings of like the canvases that sometimes have like little, you know, pieces of hair or like the nails on the side. So I'm thinking about that kind of, again, like getting my kicks thinking about different painters in recent art history, but just playing with that moment of recognizability too. Yeah. Like, so people who aren't artists, I always would love when they would come into my studio when I was making this work during like an open studio, they'd come in and be like, wait a second. Like, is that lasagna? You know, so there'd be this, I like playing with that recognizability factor. And I think that maybe adds to the humor, where you're kind of disoriented for a second. You're getting carried away just with the shape or the form or the way that the paint is used. And then your brain clicks into, oh, I know what that is. And it's just funny to kind of take a packet of ground beef, I mean, I hope it's funny, and elevate it and say, like, this is a beautiful thing that we walk past in the grocery store, and like, this has its own weird kind of majestic, singular beauty. And I'm just going to like lift that out and like worship it.
I think it's really interesting because you are taking kind of something that is mundane and banal that we all have connection to, whether it's a piece of ground beef or it's this toasted cheese. that's something that's in everybody's lives, and you are elevating it to the level of fine art. And
Mhm.
so it's serious, but it's also very playful. And so it's showing people, and that's what I love about the works in the show, is showing people that fine art can also be fun and interesting and still come from a very serious place, like with the connections to art history. And one of my questions you've already touched on was the type of material. Like, are you connecting your use of materials to the actual food itself? So like you mentioned the jam, and you're spreading it on. And I mean, I can remember as a kid, oh, there's too much jam on this section of the bread, I need to add some more or spread it out. And you're very much playing with those same notions to kind of
Right.
trigger people's memory.
Right. Like, squeezing mustard out on the hot dog. That's like,
Yeah,
everyone has their way. Is it going to wiggle? Is it straight? Like these are
exactly.
all weirdly, I would say that it was like painting asserting itself into like the mind of non-painters,
Yeah.
like you can't help but want to play with colored goo. And, acrylic paint is really great for mimicking a lot of that. I mean,
Yeah.
someone said to me, and I thought this was really smart, and I hadn't thought of it myself, which was like acrylic paint is processed paint. It's like,
Yeah.
industrial produced plastic, basically. It doesn't have the same chemical makeup or history that oil paint has. And somehow to make processed food
Mhm.
using a processed kind of type of paint has this kind of resonance for me, or an extra meaning for me. But yeah, like this one, the toasted cheese, you just think about like pulling the two parts apart. Like, don't you just want to look at that?
Yeah.
And that's very painterly,
It is.
that's like very, Jackson Pollock sort of string cheese kind of thing.
And something that it's hard to tell in the picture, but that cheese that's in the middle, it's very thick.
Hmm.
And you mentioned the process, and that's something that we talk about in the text panel, is that you're making these connections in your work to the idea of processed food, and how these food objects have more of a connection with processed food than they do, like the farm or your grandmother's recipe is what we say. Um,
Absolutely. I
yeah,
mean, that cheese on the painting has more to do with like Velveeta cheese than
exactly.
real cheese has to do with Velveeta, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
honestly, I was in my head the whole time. I thought that is just like a giant stick of Velveeta cheese slapped in the middle. Because that's what it reminds me of when you see the texture of this one in person. It does remind you of Velveeta cheese.
And it's got that sheen on it, that cheesy cheese shine.
Yeah. And it's just so wonderful. So I know you talked about this a little bit, but can you talk a little bit more about, so you chose to really base, and this is probably in all of your work, not just your food work, but you kind of base your ideas in abstraction
Mhm,
versus trying to render them hyper realistic.
mhm.
Is that just the way you like to create your works, or is there more to it than just?
Well, I would say generally that is the way I like to create my work. And I always say that I am an abstract painter that can't give up content. Like,
Yeah.
I like to play with materiality, and just let the material speak to me and show me what it wants to do. However, I can't let go. I've got to have something. I've got to have something to say. And with the food work, I felt like it was almost like a synesthesia kind of thing. Like, I knew that the painting was done when I could sort of get a taste of it in my mouth.
Mhm.
Like, if it didn't, make itself and sometimes it was a disgusting taste. Like, I actually am lactose intolerant, and then I despise cheese. So
Mhm.
if I got that cheesy tang in my mouth, and I'd be like, okay, I'm on to something. But yeah, they're meant to sort of be painterly events
Yes.
that are corralled into sense, into meaning, with these recognizable
Yeah,
food
and you're
forms.
basing it on like abstraction, but also these like in the ideas of like formalism, basing it on shapes and colors and the juxtapositions of color theory and things like that, that all create these food objects.
Mhm.
But to me, the simplification of the forms and the gestures are really what make these works. Seeing them in person, you get a whole different experience. And like I was telling you just a second ago, the ground beef painting to me is one of my favorite paintings in the entire show, and it's not very big. And to me, that always shows that it doesn't have to be this ginormous painting to have power and impact. It can be as something that's only like 12 inches and still have that same impact. And so obviously this is the installation shot, and it helps our viewers get a little bit of a sense of the size. So the toast with jam or bread with jam is the biggest, and then we have the ground beef and the toasted cheese. And then here's one other kind of side shot to show people what it looks like. I just want to thank you for giving us a little bit of insight into your work.
You.